Shout out to Checky, my beautiful daughter Checky, and her fella Jordan, and the little uns. Beautiful Suhaila and beautiful Hunter down there in Stockwell. This ain't Stockwell, this is Whitechapel Road, and there is so much interesting history here, so many interesting stories connected to this one road. Like this, for instance, that empty space behind the hoarding, that is where the Pavilion Theatre once stood. And it stood there for over 100 years and was a integral part of this community. This is where the locals would come to enjoy musicals and drama, comedians. The Drury Lane of the East first opened its doors on Easter Monday, 16th of April, 1827. A very grand and very popular place with a huge stage and a massive cut glass chandelier. You know, 4,000 people would cram in there. In the late 1800s, it was run by one Mr. John Douglas. Burnt down in 1856, was rebuilt in 1858 to accommodate even more people. Was rebuilt again in 1894 and finally closed for good in 1934. Was destroyed by a World War II bomb, 1940, smashed to pieces. And the rubble sat there until 1962 when the contractors moved in and demolished a lot, cleared it away. The Pavilion Theatre, Drury Lane of the East. Such a lot of history around here. This is interesting. This is where poor Joseph Merrick was exhibited as a novelty, as a freak show, back in the 1800s. It was Tom Norman was the showman. He let him in, put him behind a curtain, and then stood outside, just here, whipping up a crowd. And they'd be led inside, and the curtain would be swished back, and, you know, what a life. A man called Frederick Treves, wasn't it, who came over from the hospital to see the attraction and took pity on Joseph and took Joseph over the road to the hospital, just here, and that's where Joseph Merrick lived and died. That is an air ambulance just landing on that pad, Whitechapel Road. This is Valence Road, where the infamous Cray twins were raised. They weren't born around here. They were Hoxton boys, born in Hoxton, but this is where they grew up and it all went a bit naughty. Valence Road. And strange thing is, on this side, I don't know if this is, I don't know what this is, but it says Assange Road. Or is that some, I don't know. Ah, it's a bit of artwork, I think, yeah. I see, a little bit of artwork going on. Someone's been a little bit clever. Valence Road has been turned into Assange Road for whatever political reason. Valence Road. This is the famous / infamous Blind Beggar pub. Built in 1894. This is where in 1966, I suppose everybody knows, Ronnie Cray stormed in and shot George Cornell in the head. Cornell was sitting up the bar. That was the crime that brought the Cray criminal empire tumbling down. Too many witnesses, Ronnie. Too many witnesses. Before the Blind Beggar, there was a tavern here, an inn that dated back to the 1600s. And it was outside in 1865 that one William Booth, and what a good man he was. What a genuine good soul he was. William Booth stood outside just here and gave a rousing open-air sermon to a large crowd. And this right here is where the Salvation Army was formed. He was a good man, William Booth, by all accounts. He used to walk around these streets trying to help the poor people get off the drink. He used to try to persuade them to leave it alone. You could see how the alcohol destroyed people over time. Now this empty space here behind the hoardings that would have been number 100 Whitechapel Road, and this is where Wonderland once stood. And what a place that was. Wonderland was a venue that specialised in novelty entertainment, if you like. What some other people would call freak shows. It opened its doors for the first time in 1897. A huge house of entertainment, very popular, was Wonderland. This is where you could come to see, back in the day, the fire queens who used to pour molten lead into each other's mouths. You could see the incredible bear lady. How sad is that? There's an African lady who with bear-like features, terrible. Captain Murphy was here, famous giant, and loads of boxing. This became the home of East End boxing. This is where battling Jim Johnson knocked out Dewey Smith in the 11th round. So huge crowds, very popular venue. There have been meat carving competitions, sewing competitions, singing and dancing. Very popular place. It was managed in the late 1800s by Harry Jacobs and Jack Wolfe, but they fell out, and there were some pretty public arguments apparently here, especially during the boxing shows, Monday nights and Saturday nights, big boxing shows. And Jacobs had to leave. Jack Wolfe held the lease, Harry Jacobs had to walk. He left. He tried putting on some shows of his own in other halls, local halls. He wasn't very successful because Wonderland was so popular. And then lo and behold, what do you know, 1911, Wonderland burnt to the ground, and Harry Jacobs opened his own boxing venue in Backchurch Lane, which is where I'm heading now. Here on this slight curve in the road once stood Premier Land, pronounced locally as Premier Land and abbreviated locally to the Land. You going down the Land tonight, Bob? Don't know, Bill. After leaving Wonderland, Harry Jacobs renovated what was an old fish market, a disused fish market here, and turned it into the #1 boxing venue in East London, and actually a venue of some eventual significance in world boxing history. People flocked here in their thousands. Premier Land opened on the 9th of December 1911. A young lad named Kid Lewis boxed on the opening night. He went on to become Ted Kid Lewis, an all-time great, two-time world welterweight champion. 192 wins, 78 KOs along the way, 78 KOs. Jesus. Ted Kid Lewis actually came back and ran this place, managed this place, years after Harry Jacobs had bowed out. They called Ted the Aldgate Sphinx. He won his European title here in 1914, and he's the first British boxer ever to go to America and beat an American for a world title. Teddy Baldock boxed here, the pride of Poplar, He boxed here over 20 times. He was as popular then as, maybe more so than Anthony Joshua is now. He had huge support, and he remains Britain's youngest ever world champion. Jack Kid Berg had his first 37 fights here. He went on to become the world light welterweight champion. Again, another East End Jew. I mean, they could fight. If you were a boxer then and you see the Star of David in the opposite corner, you knew you was in for a serious night's work. Nipper Pat Daly also boxed here, and that is a phenomenal story, incredible story, incredibly sad. He turned professional age 10, and by the age of 12 he was schooling big men, I mean outclassing big men in spars and in competition. He boxed and beat the best in Britain. By the age of 14 he was fighting in hard 15-rounders and outclassing everybody. A unique natural talent, and he beat the best in Europe, he beat the best in the military, he beat the best in Britain. He was too young to fight for a title because he was 15, but he beat the champions, and he was worked into the ground by his trainer, burnt him out and wore him out, and he retired age 17. Nipper Pat didn't even win a title. Back in the 99 wins, I think, along the way, back in the pre-safeguarding roaring 20s. And they all boxed here. Premier Land. The land. So that's enough boxing. There is another seriously interesting feature here. This little recess here, you can see it on the map. This little recess here is an old burial ground, was an old burial ground. It dates back to at least 1776. That's the oldest headstone that was found here. Burial grounds became big business in the late 1700s as the population of London grew and church cemeteries ran out of space. Private burial grounds became the thing. They were not referred to as cemeteries because they were not attached to churches. Burial grounds. In 1830, an undertaker named Mr. Samuel Sheen took over the business, acquired this land, and he also owned a pub directly opposite the main entrance, which would have been on the Commercial Road. In 1839, a Mr. George Walker complained about this place. He said that Sheen has planted it with trees and shrubs which are sufficiently attractive, but the ground is saturated with human putrescence. Mr. Sheen charged between 8 and 15 shillings for an adult burial, and apparently he was raking it in. A lot of private burial grounds became overcrowded, and so ground owners took to digging trenches or pits and piling coffins in on top of coffins. Money, 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 money. This burial ground closed in 1854. And in 1895, a survey of disused burial grounds stated that this site had been immensely used and disgustingly crowded. In 1993, the Museum of London Archaeological Service evaluated the land, and they found pits filled with as many as 7 coffins. So this is Gower's Walk. It runs parallel to Backchurch Lane. This is a good view into now what was the old burial ground. There's now a sort of play area, sort of a recreational area for the residents of this fancy new block here. That there, Screwfix, is the entrance to Backchurch Lane. This here would be the entrance to Mr. Sheen's burial ground. I think they're student apartments. This would have been the entrance to the burial ground, and I think the chapel, the way in would have been here, and his little chapel, Mr. Sheen's chapel, would have been there. And over the road, looking for something that would have been Mr. Sheen's pub. I don't know, would that have been it there? Or maybe this. No, that looks like housing. Maybe that was Mr. Sheen's pub over there. Who knows? All a very long time ago now. I've always been very interested in the Hammersmith nude murders case, known to some as Jack the Stripper murder case. I don't like that name. But one of the victims, it is essentially a West London story, but one of the victims, Gwyneth Rees, was arrested and charged for apparently soliciting in Backchurch Lane, early 60s. On April the 24th, 1849, there was a huge boiler explosion here in Backchurch Lane at a premises called the Patent Sawmill. Reports say that a 12 horsepower steam boiler blew up and sent tons of metal and rubble 100 foot into the air. The sky turned black with steam and dust, and when it cleared, the metal and rubble began raining down, smashing into houses and factories around here. One of the boilers, weighing many tons, was blown apart, and one chunk, weighing 2 tons, smashed into a counting office. The schoolhouse in St Charles Street was partially blown down, and one man had both his legs broken. Another youth had his arm busted by flying bricks. And Mrs Young was buried in rubble and scalded. And Mrs Bailey, who'd been looking out of her window at the time of the blast, she died of shock the following morning. Boston Manor Road, Brentford. Boston Manor Tube Station, Piccadilly line, is about a 3-minute walk straight ahead, straight up that way. To get there, you'd have to pass Swincombe Avenue, which is about 20 yards up on the right-hand side. Swincombe Avenue holds a grim old secret. But before I go there, have a look at this. Boston Manor Park, one of my favourite parks. I used to bring my children here when they were little. I was a weekend dad, which meant that every moment was precious, and we spent a fair few of them in here. Memory Lane, West London. Back in 1964, one Mr. Clark May lived at 199 Boston Manor Road. Early on the morning of Friday 24th of April 1964, he opened his back garden gate and got the shock of his life. There in the alleyway was a dead young woman lying naked on a pile of rubbish. 22-year-old Helen Bartholomew had been strangled and concealed someplace else before being dumped there. 5 years previously, 21-year-old Elizabeth Figg had been found naked and dead in Duke's Meadow, Chiswick. She too had been strangled. 3 years after that, in 1963, the body of Gwyneth Rees was found in a Barnes Council refuse site. A year later, Hannah Tailford and Irene Lockwood were found naked and dead at separate locations along the banks of the River Thames in Hammersmith. The police were already on the hunt for a serial killer by the time Helen Bartholomew was found. Minute specks of metallic spray paint on Helen's body gave detectives their first major lead in the case. The paint type was traced to the Heron trading estate in Acton. In the year following the discovery of Helen's body, 3 more young women were found naked and dead in West London. 27-year-old Bridget O'Hara was found lying behind a storage shed on the Heron trading estate. The murders remain unsolved, and the case files are closed to public inspection.